I can speak as a Christian who's wrestled with Darwin for many years, I feel like in the course of wrestling with Darwin and coming to accept that what evolution teaches us about natural history is more or less true, I feel like I have come to appreciate the natural world more than I did before because I feel connected to it in ways that I did not. I feel that I am sort of kin, if you will, to nature, and so that when you are in nature, you can kind of enjoy it, but when you reflect on the fact that there is DNA in the animals of the forest that is similar to the DNA in you, and you think about the long history that life had on this planet and so on, and how you relate to that history, it's really quite extraordinary. At the very end of Saving Darwin, I tell a story about going for a canoe ride with my daughter on a lake in New Brunswick, and kind of just experiencing the Canadian wilderness in that way, and how meaningful that has become to me as I try to do that every summer. But when I reflect on the meaning of all of this, it doesn't seem to me like Darwinism has taken the meaning out of the world. It's just kind of established the meaning and the mystery in different ways. So let me just read you the very last paragraph of the book where I kind of summarize my reaction to this. In coming to understand the world so much better, we have not banished its mystery. We may not cower before the lightning bolt or hide from the thunder. We no longer throw virgins into volcanoes to appease the lava god. Now we bow before different mysteries. We float tenuously on a tiny planet in the immensity of space, humbled by the knowledge that it took 10 billion years of cosmic evolution to prepare our planet for life. 4 billion years of the most remarkable and creative explosion of life has preceded us on that planet. And now, here we are, at once both a fragile species and strangely a danger to other species and even to ourselves. We have learned so much about the inner workings of our world, and yet so little about what we should do with that knowledge. In deep and important ways, we have not dispelled the mystery of our existence at all. We have simply established it with greater clarity. We shall not cease from exploration, wrote T.S. Eliot in Little Gidding, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. Thank you.
Questions.
Do you want me just to field them?
Back to your idea what you mentioned about in the image of God, how you can think of it as being a graduated thing, of image of God. It's a nice way of thinking of it. I'm wondering how you think of the part of humans that's eternal, if you want to call it your soul or whatever you want to call it. How can you have degrees of eternal? How do you think about that?
Well, that's a complicated theological question. But even in the traditional picture, we still have this interesting biblical language about like God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, and that God will redeem all of creation. So there's something about all of the created order that's of great value to God. So when we say that God values all of creation and will create a new creation out of the old creation, doesn't it seem that whatever it is that God is going to do with the rocks and the grass and the chimpanzees and us can just all be of one piece? And maybe the image of God can be understood as like that part of each aspect of creation which is of greatest value to God, of most interest. And God has a particular way that he relates to human beings, but God is also interested in the rest of the creation too, and perhaps the emergent image of God in other parts of the creation can be understood as those aspects that God takes particular pleasure in.
My question or comment
that I agree with you. There's sort of a continuum of behaviors that doesn't seem to have a clear demarcation between humans and primates in many of our behavioral areas that we would have thought are part of our imageness, if that's the right word. And so I'm thinking that any particular property of human beings is perhaps not a way to think of what marks us or gives us or carries God's image. Perhaps it makes more sense to think of that image as in a sense, a status granted to us by God rather than anything that's part of our intrinsic character. It's sort of, my analogy is sort of like being knighted. You know, if you're knighted by your sovereign, then that's a status that you carry, and now you bear, in a sense, the image, the mark of your sovereign wherever you go. You're his representative. And that also saves us from the problem then of what about those among us who are not fully capable in one way or another? You know, a child that's not born perhaps with full mental capabilities. We wouldn't want to say that because that child can't reason or doesn't have a good sense of morality or some other characteristic that that child is not in God's image. But if it's a status that all humans share, then we don't have to worry about that kind of problem. And every child, whether fully capable or less capable, is still bears the value that we say is human.
Yes, and I think that works theologically. I know a lot of theologians who use that sort of relational description of the image of God. I think that's a newer theological twist to think of it in that way. Probably.
Avoid the sort of gradual.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about your idea of the fall. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but are you saying that as humans evolved, or I guess as nature evolved, we sort of discovered this latent fallenness?
Well, I wouldn't put it just like that, but I think I could unpack what you said and agree with you that that's what it. Yes.
I guess I'd go further and ask: would you be comfortable with a pre-creation fall?
A pre-creation fall? Well, I don't think that's meaningful. I mean, I think I once asked a theologian if there was any problem in simply equating human selfishness with human sinfulness, and saying that these are just two languages to talk about the exact same human characteristic. And he thought for a minute and he said yes, he thought that would be okay. So to me, our fallen nature is our pathological selfishness, and it just doesn't make sense to think of that as something which sort of pre-existed human beings. It seems to me that it's very reasonable for us to think that that is something that emerged through time, because selfishness is very valuable in succeeding in the world. And when you have selfish genes, and so your children look after themselves the way you look after yourself, those genes are going to be selected for. And so it's certainly easy to understand how it is that we became selfish. And so what I think is really interesting in the Genesis story of creation is this complicated human nature that's there, that we are in the image of God. I mean, Adam and Eve make this inexplicable decision to kind of screw up an idyllic situation and so on. And there's a kind of a strange mixture of sensible tendencies and incomprehensible ones there together. And here we have these people who are fallen and cursed by God, but also in the image of God. And that seems to me to be a very good description of the human condition today. I mean, we are very selfish, and we have to fight against our selfish tendencies. But hey, we know we're selfish, and we can see this in ourselves. And so we struggle with this today. So to me, the fall doesn't have to be a historical event where we suddenly went from being not fallen to fallen, but it's